In this guide, I'm going to show you exactly why you suck in mid lane, and more importantly, the simple ways to fix it. My name is Strumpist. I've been a challenger mid laner for 12 years, coached every elo imaginable from Iron to Challenger, and even played pro for FlyQuest. And if there's one thing I've learned during that time, it's that being good at mid lane doesn't require you to have absurd game knowledge or crazy mechanics. You can see immediate improvements in your rank by just understanding a few simple concepts and fixing a few key mistakes you probably don't even know you're making. And one of these is that you don't actually understand how to trade. But how hard can trading be? Isn't it basically just you land your skills to deal damage and dodge your enemy skills, and eventually if you do that enough times, you can get a kill? Well, actually, yeah, that's basically it. But what I just described here is the what of trading, not the how. Understanding how to trade is the difference between a good mid and one that sucks, and it's the difference between you winning your lane 90% of the time versus coin flipping your lane every game, hoping that you can land more abilities than your opponent, which is why I'm going to give you a formulaic approach to winning your lane every game, no matter the matchup, no matter the rank. These fundamentals will apply whether you're Iron, Diamond, Challenger, or even Faker himself. The best thing about mid lane fundamentals is that they apply to everyone, no exceptions, because that's how the game was designed. And the design I'm talking about here is, of course, minion waves. The fact that minions are the basis of progression in a game of League is essential. Without killing minions, you get no gold, no experience, and no ability to shove and pressure towers or objectives. So because you know that every mid laner is going to want to maximize farming minions during a laning phase, you can base your entire trading game plan around it. This is what we call trading around action timers. And this is one of the core ideas I personally built our Season 16 mid lane essentials course on how to win lane around over at SkillCapped. But what exactly is an action? For our purposes, an action is a time where you or your opponent have to trade, hit a minion with an auto attack or ability, or ultimately concede if the trade or last hit looks too risky to go for. Basically, an action is any time that you have to input an auto attack or ability, or else you'll get punished for it, either it be losing out on CS or losing a trade. But before we jump into some examples, I just want to quickly mention that this concept is only one piece of what actually makes you a good mid laner. That's why I personally built a full 6-part course for SkillCapped Season 16 mid lane essentials, covering everything I truly believe a mid laner needs to learn in order to climb. We start with the right mindset and fundamentals you need as a mid laner, then jump into some of the most important lessons I wish somebody had taught me when I first started trying to climb. Then we get into the must-know concepts that actually help you win lane, like how to abuse level timers, when to recall, and how to avoid ganks, and the simple but incredibly effective tricks you can use to snowball in the game no matter your matchup. There's also an entire chapter on the rules you need to follow to roam exactly like a challenger mid laner, a full chapter on mid to late game macro, and the decisions 99% of players get wrong. And I even break down and analyze some of the most common mistakes I see players below challenger make over and over again. Honestly, this is the course I wish I had when I started, and people seem to love it because it already has countless 5-star reviews. So if you want to dive deeper into anything we cover in this video and so much more, check out the link in the description or pinned comment for an exclusive discount. And remember, if you don't climb at least 5 divisions, SkillCapped will give you every penny back anyways, so there's nothing to lose. But anyways, let's jump into some examples. In this first matchup, we have an Emerald Vex versus Ahri. For the most part, their ability cooldowns and range are pretty similar. So the thing that is going to decide this lane is how they trade around action timers. And remember, that's when a mid laner has to either last hit, contest the last hit if the enemy tries to harass you, or concede the last hit if the trade would be losing. The most important thing to note here is that Ahri took Deathfire Touch while Vex took Electrocute. Ahri's win con is taking short trades while Vex wants longer ones so that she can land enough abilities and autos to proc Electrocute. To start, Vex throws out an E and misses. The reason she misses, however, is because Vex is trying to land a skill shot when Ahri isn't forced into an action. Ahri doesn't have to last hit anything, so she's free to dodge in any direction she pleases, and she's not locked into any skill or auto animations either, so all Ahri is focused on is dodging. In fact, if you were to put me in this game as the Vex, as a challenger player, it would be very likely that I would miss the E too, because there is nothing predictable about Ahri's movements right now. But oh well, Vex missed the E and Ahri gets to land her W. And this is expected since Vex tried to aim a slow-moving skill shot when Ahri wasn't locked into an action timer. However, the one thing Vex did right is that she queued up an auto attack while Ahri was dodging, letting her get a 1 auto lead on Ahri. So even after tanking Ahri's W, if Vex had just kept autoing, she would have procced Electrocute, and that deals similar damage to Ahri's W, so she would have actually went even in the trade. But it is still fine that Vex didn't see that angle. The neat thing about laning is that you get near infinite chances to make up your mistakes, so Vex can easily win this lane back. Now let's look at how Ahri plays with her HP advantage. She's holding pressure by walking up to zone Vex from lane. This is really good, but she actually makes a huge mistake revolving around action timers. When you're this far up physically in lane already, you can already set up your next trade to be winning. But Ahri is clearly looking to get another W trade on Vex here. This is completely wrong, because if Ahri were to trade onto Vex and Vex lands her E, that trade would be winning for Vex and entirely throw Ahri's lead away. In fact, there is only one correct play for Ahri here that can entirely dictate the pace of the next few waves, and most mids won't know this. What do you think it is? If you guessed autoing the wave, then you're correct, and this ties into action timers. Because Ahri will be in auto range of the enemy melee soon, while Vex is super far from Ahri's wave, this will mean that Ahri getting 1 or 2 autos off on the wave before Vex will guarantee that Ahri is the first mid laner to have a last hit action timer, which means that once Ahri's timer is finished, she is freed up to harass Vex on her own last hit. Of course, the counterplay if you're the second person to last hit as Vex is to try and harass when Ahri is locked into her last hit action. But even if that works, Ahri would still be able to trade back during that time, or maybe on Vex's upcoming last hit action, and in theory still have shove to get level 2 first. And this counterplay is where you truly get to outplay your lane opponents as a mid laner, by baiting them to try and harass you on your action timers, but just avoiding it and landing your own damage instead. But even without all that, you can completely destroy most mid laners by only abusing just the enemy's action timers, without the complication of counterplaying on your own timers. So, Ahri throws her lead by not autoing the minions, and instead Vex gets the first auto off. This puts Vex back in the lead for getting the first last hit off, but then Vex throws it by not continuing to auto for 3 whole seconds. And that is another reason most mids suck. They don't abuse their auto attacks as another resource to set up good timers to harass enemy last hits. Vex is currently guaranteed to hit level 2 first, but randomly stops autoing, probably because the minion she was thinking about farming is getting low. When this happens, you should shift your auto attack focus onto a higher HP minion so that you can keep up in shove. And then, after Vex throws the lead, Ahri completely trolls too. She's already secured shove, so all she has to do is keep it up until she hits level 2 first and then unlocks her Q, which has a much higher range than her W and gives her a better trading pattern. But instead, Ahri decides to flip her lane by running into Vex when Vex isn't locked into any actions. She doesn't need to last hit, so Vex can fully focus on trading, and as a result, Vex can just freely land her E because Ahri is literally just sprinting into her range, and the trade goes about as expected, with Vex winning out with Electrocute. Not only that, but Ahri is tanking 3 caster minions for a long time, while Vex is only tanking 2 for a short time, and this adds up and turns into a hard winning trade for Vex. But Ahri's saving grace is that she still has shove, and ends up getting a favorable trade where she hits level 2 and lands Q while dodging Vex's E. Like I said earlier, you have infinite chances to win your lane back. Alright, so Ahri shoves Vex into tower and looks for a trade, but notice Ahri's mistake. She is not trading on an action timer. Vex doesn't have to last hit right now, and if Ahri had just went for her Q while Vex was trying to set up CS under her tower, she probably lands Q or zones Vex from CSing, which would be a win-win scenario. Okay, so now Ahri is down her Q and she decides to W forwards. Here's where a little bit of matchup knowledge comes handy, which I'll also give a formula for understanding basically all matchups later in this guide. The important thing about Ahri W is that it gives her move speed briefly, making it a super good tool for dodging skill shots. Ahri is a super popular champ, so Vex should know this. So after Ahri misses her Q, Vex has 2 realistic options on her upcoming action timer when the minions are about to die. Either she can use her spells to farm the wave under tower, or she can trade back against Ahri while she's trying to harass. Both options are good, but one is way superior, trading back against Ahri because Vex is up a spell since Ahri missed Q. But Vex messed up. She aims her E while Ahri is sped up, and then misses everything else, losing out on both the CS and the trade. Vex entirely griefed her action here, but mostly because she didn't realize that she had the cooldown advantage, and playing it patiently would result in a guaranteed winning trade. The idea was there, but the execution was not. All Vex had to do here was just run at Ahri and close the distance and wait for Ahri's W move speed to run out, and then EQ would be guaranteed, and Vex would probably kill Ahri or get her flash with how far up in the lane she is, and that would instantly win her the lane. But even after all this, the lane is still pretty even, and from here both laners are just throwing out skill shots randomly while neither is locked into a last hit action, so they're basically just coin flipping the lane with how close these trades are. If either of these mid laners properly time their trades around the enemy's action timers, then they'd just be getting free harass off without getting traded back, but instead they're just both focused on landing their skill shots without actual thought into how and when they should look for trades. And eventually Vex just gets ganked and dies to the enemy jungler, but had Vex timed a single one of her trades around Ahri's action timers or counterplayed correctly on her own actions, then Vex would have just killed Ahri and based instead of losing her lane to a gank that is mostly out of her control. Alright, so we just saw an Emerald Vex and Ahri duking it out, but if Vex knew more about the matchup, she probably could have won despite playing horribly around action timers. And the reason that Vex sucks at mid is because she probably doesn't think about the bigger picture enough. The absolute first thing you should be thinking about when you load into a game is, how do I want to play my matchup? You don't need a super specific detailed plan, but you just want to know how the lane should generally play out. While there are tons of matchups in mid lane and you cannot memorize them all, there are two things you can do to help with this. The first is, while you are in champion select and have already picked your champion, or even during loading screen, you go to Google and you look up the champion you think you'll be laning against by typing something like Syndra Wiki or whatever champion you're verse. And make sure that you go to the website that says wiki.leagueoflegends.com, because there is an outdated site called leagueoflegends.fandom that will give you outdated info. The most important things to look at are the cooldowns of their basic abilities and their range. Don't worry about the damage. Riot has done a pretty good job balancing most abilities to be around the same level of damage, so unless your verse is something like Aurora Q or Cassio level 2 Q E spam or Victor level 1 Q, trading one of your abilities for the enemies is usually going to be an even trade. And then you want to compare against the ability range and cooldown of the champion that you yourself are playing. For example, let's say I'm playing Cassiopeia into Syndra and we both start Q level 1. Cassio Q does 15 less damage than Syndra Q, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is the cooldown and range. If you went with just the damage, then Syndra Q sounds better, but Cassio Q has a 3.5 second cooldown while Syndra has a 7 second cooldown, meaning that for every Q that Syndra can cast, Cassio can potentially land 2, giving her a much better trading potential. Not only that, but Cassio Q even has 850 range, which means that it has a 50 range advantage over Syndra's Q. So at level 1, Cassiopeia should win trades or be able to zone her with her stronger Q. But so far, we've only talked about level 1. What about 2, 3, and onwards? And what if you're a melee mid laner? Don't worry, I'll have melee specific tips coming up soon, but for now this mage versus mage matchup blueprint is still important because the same concepts apply all the same to melee versus melee matchups. So what we analyzed was the level 1 starting ability, which is usually what champs max first, but of course there are exceptions. Cassio herself doesn't max Q first, and Twisted Fate doesn't max W first, even if he goes at level 1. For level 2 and 3 onwards, you want to think about what is their highest ranged ability, or if they have one, what is their CC ability. For Syndra, her highest ranged and CC ability is her E, which has a 15 second cooldown and a range of 1300. This means that Cassiopeia's Q of 3.5 second cooldown and 850 range will not matter if she cannot even reach Syndra. But that's why we care about the cooldowns and range, not just one or the other in isolation. If Syndra uses her QE combo, then her E goes on cooldown for 15 seconds. Then Cassiopeia gets the opportunity to go back to a trading pattern where it's her Q versus Syndra Q, and she has the advantage again up until Syndra's E comes back up. So the way you want to think about matchups is, what is the cooldown and range of their main damage ability, and how does it interact with mine? And then what is the cooldown of their longest range ability? Does it outrange mine? And if so, how much time do I have to trade aggressively on even or better footing if I can bait it out? But of course, this isn't the entire picture, it's just a guideline. Some matchups are more complicated than others, but at the very least, now you have a blueprint for approaching matchups with comparable range. And when it comes to melee versus range matchups, the number one thing you have to do to not suck is just preserve your HP in the first 2 levels. As soon as most melee mids hit level 3, they will absolutely destroy the ranged champion in trades, because they often have higher base HP and base damages on their abilities, and take more aggressive runes like Electrocute. Take for example this Challenger Qiyana one trick that I versed, who literally did not attempt to trade or last hit and only stood in EXP range for the first 2 levels. Now obviously this is a bit extreme, but genuinely it's worth doing if you're playing Qiyana, and you'll see why in a bit. Other melees often have ways to farm without getting harassed much. For example, Silas Q, Fizz E, Zed Q, Echo Q, so you don't have to be as extreme as this Qiyana when it comes to preserving health on most champions. But as soon as Qiyana hit level 3, I lost my entire HP bar, and she sent me back to base, because otherwise I would just die if I stayed. If you're playing melee versus range matchups, all you need to do is survive the first 2 levels with high HP, and then your trading patterns simply do more damage than the ranged champions. And when it comes to melee versus melee matchups, we're back to thinking about trades in terms of cooldowns like we mentioned earlier in the Cassio vs Syndra example. The only difference is melee mids usually have a lot more gap closers, so these matchups usually come down to mechanical execution. If you're in a volatile matchup, be willing to use your gap closer or flash to outplay your opponent. Whoever has more aggression and killer instinct will usually be the one who wins out in the end. So we just talked about how ability cooldowns and range factor into matchups, but how do we actually get in range to deal our damage? This is where spacing comes in. Simply put, spacing is how you move your champion to deal your damage and avoid the enemies by staying out of their range. While spacing is one of the most complicated skills to master in League, you can easily fix 90% of your spacing issues with just 3 tips. The first tip is that the moment you notice that you have an advantage in lane, whether it's because you have an extra ability up because the enemy wasted theirs, or it's about to be the enemy's last hit action timer for you to aim around, you want to move up to put yourself in a position to deal damage. We'll take a look at a game I played against a master tier mid laner. Despite being masters, they're wasting abilities on the wave to farm and not respecting the fact that I'm looking to punish them on their last hit timers, which allows me to win the lane with just 2 concepts: cooldown management and spacing. I start the lane with a trade before the minion waves even meet. I want to get rid of TF's bone plating, and if he extends the trade, I can proc electrocute to win the trade. It ends up just being an auto W and out. But notice how I position after the trade. I keep myself out of TF's auto range because I know I have no W right now, whereas he does have his W up, so I would lose the trade. I make sure to stay out of range, walking backwards when he walks forwards. This is a key concept of spacing, which is matching your enemy's movements to make sure that you stay out of their damage range. And then notice how I play around Twisted Fate's abilities. As soon as he uses W and uses a card on a minion, I immediately sprint towards him. It's not that complicated, but I rarely see mid laners below masters apply this easy tip of just running at your opponent the moment they waste their ability on the wave or miss their ability trying to harass. And if masters players like this TF are making this mistake of wasting abilities, you can be sure that your opponents will too. And if I don't do this forwards movement every time he makes this mistake, I will never be able to trade TF, and he'll just get to wait out his W cooldown in peace, and I won't be able to win lane as hard as I will end up doing. Now, going back to the first trade, TF himself has a few options here. Notice that this is his action timer. He can either last hit this minion, trade back on me, or concede the last hit. He chose the worst option. He tries to last hit, cancels it, and also gets traded by me. In this case, it would have been best for him to just concede to preserve HP. If he tries to trade back without an ability, he'll just lose the trade 100%, so conceding is the only thing that makes sense here. And right after I land my auto W, I back up instantly because I know his W is coming back up while mine is still on cooldown. So we are spacing him so that he cannot hit us back. And yet again, he uses W on the wave. My W isn't up yet, but it's coming up very soon, and TF has no ability. So yet again, I sprint forwards to see if I can find a trade timer on him. He gives it to me, and notice how I phrased it. TF gave it to me because for some reason he wanted to trade back without an ability versus electrocute Ahri. He's not even on an action timer right now. He doesn't need to last hit anything. But if he didn't mess up his spacing and just conceded until his W came back up, I would still have gained shove advantage by autoing while I zoned him from the minions, securing my level 2. So even if your forwards movement doesn't end up in any abilities being thrown, it's still something you should do to exert pressure on the wave. Eventually, I end up killing TF because of all the trades that I won by using the simple spacing technique of running forwards on aggression timers and walking backwards to safety before the enemy gets their ability back up. And if this works on masters players, it'll be sure to work on your opponents. The next 2 tips on how to fix your spacing revolves around avoiding the enemy's damage. And the second tip I have for you is that you want to position yourself just outside of max range of the enemy's damage range. By doing this, you can go in and out of their damage range and bait out their abilities by making them think you're going to go into their range, but ducking out right when you do. This is how you make your opponents waste their abilities, by making them think they have a good trade timer because you entered their damage range, but in reality, you're just baiting it out so that you can find your own trade timings. Do this enough times, and you'll find yourself easily winning lane through trades. In fact, this technique becomes really important at the higher elos. In the clips I've shown you so far, I'm actually the LeBlanc playing on my challenger account, and because this is high elo, my opponent Aurora is aware of action timers and has been aiming most of her abilities around it. And in fact, she's actually using the technique of running forwards to punish enemy cooldowns that I taught you earlier. I'm just not giving her the angles because I refuse to fight without my own cooldown since it would make me lose way too much HP. And a really advanced technique you can do is baiting them into using an ability on your action timer by pretending to last hit but spacing out at the last second to make them waste their ability. Now, you probably won't need to do this technique of purposely giving up CS to bait out abilities unless you reach masters or higher, because because your opponents probably aren't even aware of the existence of the action timer system. But I'm showing you this because spacing is truly one of the most rewarding and high skill expression techniques in mid lane. Every single trade adds up, and that one extra trade that you avoided or that you were able to land on your opponent can be the difference between you winning or losing your lane. The final tip for spacing is that when you think your opponent is about to throw a skill shot, you should only juke in 3 main directions: forwards, left, or right. We're not including backwards here because that's what I just covered. Juking in and out of their range is dodging backwards. But that only works if you're near their max range. This tip is for when you're well within their damage range and it's not possible for you to escape, so you have to dodge the damage. The 2 most common types of skill shots are orbs like Syndra and Cassio Q, and missiles like Ahri Q and Jace Q. When it comes to missiles, you should juke at a 90-degree angle to your opponent. Draw a line in your head between you and your opponent and then choose a direction, either left or right, and dodge at that angle. The reason for this is that if you dodge at, let's say, a 45-degree angle, you're basically covering half the distance and are less likely to leave the skill shot's hitbox instead of fully committing to one direction. And when it comes to orb skill shots, juking at a 90-degree angle is still good, but juking forwards is super OP. 99% of players don't expect this, so you can completely win a trade or skirmish by dodging a huge source of the enemy's damage. So to summarize the tips for you to fix your spacing, you should move forwards to look for a trade with an ability advantage, juke in and out of the enemy's max range to bait their abilities out, and dodge at a 90-degree angle versus linear skill shots, and forwards or 90 degrees versus orb skill shots. If you do these 3 things, you'll be able to win 90% of your lanes. Another reason you might suck in mid lane is because you aren't using your summoner spells correctly. These have been in the game since the game came out, but still the average mid laner doesn't know how to use them. These spells are even more important than any of your abilities. They can either save you from a mistake or punish the enemy's mistake. And summoner spells are especially important in Season 16. With the Home Guards buff lasting towards your furthest minion wave, you don't need to take teleport on every mid anymore. In fact, the only mids that should be going TP are champions like Veigar and Azir that need it to scale, or a champion like TF whose trading patterns are weaker but still gets guaranteed impact at level 6. But hold on, Strumpus, every pro mid laner is still running TP. Well, the reason pro players still take TP is because they're playing competitive league. Their opponents are much better, and at that level, it's much more of a team-based game compared to win lane, win game. But if you're watching this video, chances are you're just playing solo queue, so you need all the edge you can get in your games, so you should take combat summoners like Ignite, Ghost, Cleanse, or Exhaust. Seriously, teleport is useless in solo queue, even in Challenger. Here is a game where I played LeBlanc in solo queue, and I took Ignite instead of teleport. On the other hand, my lane opponent Syndra has TP. After a bunch of volatile trading, Syndra gets to recall first, and uses her teleport to get back to lane. Guess what? Because of Home Guards being so OP, she barely got any value out of it. TP only gave her a 2 minion EXP and gold advantage, which is definitely not worth it. Meanwhile, my Ignite single-handedly won my team the early game. Lee Sin finds my Nasus jungle in the river and decides to engage on him. Now, this might work normally since Lee Sin has insane healing from W and instantly stacks Conqueror, but because I have Ignite, I dealt 130 true damage and reduced his healing, completely winning early for me and my team. But the one issue that you might run into if you start taking combat summoners is that you just don't use them quick enough. This isn't a matter of reaction time or mechanics, it's just a mentality shift of being prepared to use your summoners rather than reacting in the moment. Take for example this game I played Syndra versus LeBlanc where we both had Ignite. I wasn't expecting my opponent to be so aggressive, so I didn't flash in time, but if I was expecting it, LeBlanc would be griefing because I could dodge all her damage and kill her myself. So my tip to you is that when you're fighting, be prepared to use your summoners. Make a mental note right as you begin fighting. The difference is as clear as day. When in this Rise game I played later that day, I was instantly ready to use my sums anytime something volatile was happening on my screen. Rather than greeting my summoners or just not being prepared to press them, I used them as soon as I deemed it necessary, and it ended up saving my life twice. Aside from trading, a huge reason you might suck in mid is that you don't actually understand minion waves. Waves are the entire foundation of mid lane, and it's also the basis of League of Legends in general, so you need to know how they work. And while I could honestly go on for hours about waves, this video is already long enough. But inside our Season 16 mid lane essentials course, we have an entire chapter on how you should be playing around waves. Not just in lane, but also how to use waves to decide when to roam, when to group, when to side lane, and how to make better mid to late game macro decisions. So if you want a deeper breakdown of how waves actually control the entire game, I highly recommend checking that out too. But for now, we're going to focus on two of the biggest wave mistakes you're probably making right now. And the first mistake is that you're missing waves that you shouldn't. The most important thing to understand is that if you're missing an entire wave and you're not getting any value elsewhere, such as a successful roam, invade, dive, skirmish, or recall, then you are making a huge mistake. In fact, this mistake is so bad that the only thing worse than missing a wave for free is dying. So how do you avoid missing these waves? And why, Strompist, are you telling me that I'm missing waves when I swear that I'm trying to get as many minions as I possibly can every game? Well, here's the thing. No one misses waves on purpose, but chances are you are missing out on waves without realizing because you prioritize things aside from your own economy and lane that you shouldn't be focused on. And the biggest offender of this is roaming. Roaming is an amazing way to impact the map and carry, but it is not your #1 priority. You are not the jungler, so what you need to prioritize is getting yourself ahead, not your team. And yes, sometimes roams can get both you and your team ahead, but if that ends up not being the case and you just roam for nothing, then you are seriously griefing yourself. And this is where you're missing out on free waves. It might not seem like much, missing out on 6 or 7 minions, but the real value in a wave lies in the experience more than the gold. As long as you have EXP in a game, you'll be relevant. But when you miss multiple waves, that adds up. Missing 1 minion wave means you're down 1/3 of a level, while missing 2 or 3 means you'll constantly be underleveled throughout the game and be unable to access your important spikes before your enemies, like level 9 when you max your first ability, level 11 when you get a second point in your ult, level 13 when you max your second ability, and most importantly, level 16 when your ult is maxed and at its strongest. So, to make sure that you don't fall behind while still having tons of roam timers and map impact, I'll be giving you a few simple rules you can follow. The first rule is do not leave your lane if you haven't shoved. You should always farm any available waves before you make a play. This is where having lane priority is super OP. If you're the first to shove, chances are you have free time to look for a play on the map while your opponent is stuck under tower, or even if they match your play, the play will be over and it's too late. But even if you have lane priority, you should still be thinking about the next wave. This is where a lot of mids miss out on farm. They farm the current wave, but they don't think about the future wave. So they go to force a roam play and nothing happens, and then they're late back to lane. Even if they shove the first wave, they miss out on the second wave. Do not let this happen to you. And the fix is easy. What you can do is hover a roam, and this is really as simple as it gets. When you think there is a potential for you to make a play, just sit either in the middle of the river if it's safe, or in your own jungle pathways if the river seems dangerous, and wait. Literally just wait and observe what's happening. If it looks like you'll be able to impact the play when you arrive, then you commit. Otherwise, you make it back to the next minion wave in time and lose out on nothing. In fact, in higher elos where players have better map awareness, just the act of hovering is enough to exert pressure through Fog of War alone. They have no clue where you are, so on the off chance you're committing to the roam, the enemy side laners can't play aggressive. And if you do end up committing, it should only be to good plays. But what does that even mean, good play? Well, luckily for you, I have a super simple formula on deciding whether to commit to a roam or not. There are 3 types of fights that you can roam to: losing, neutral, and winning fights. Let's talk about the first type of fight, losing. This is the most important type of fight you need to think about. If your teammates are losing a fight, and even if you arrive, it will stay losing, either because your teammates will die before you arrive, or the enemies are just winning that hard and will have full HP and cooldowns to kill you if you go, then you should avoid it. But on the other hand, if a fight is losing, but your arrival will save the day, and you can turn that losing play into a winning one with your roam, then you should always go to it. In fact, this is the only type of roam that is worth entirely ditching your wave for. And that's exactly what I did in this challenger game as LeBlanc. In this clip, I'm pathing back to mid from base when I spot Lee Sin on an ally ward getting ready to dive my top laner. So far, I'm laning pretty well. I'm 5 CS up on my lane opponent, and collecting the incoming wave will make me be 11 CS up. But I decide that is not worth it. If I don't counter this losing play, my entire game is over. I will lose the game. My Nasus is already 0-2 and my Mastery is 0-1, so both my top and jungle will be hard losing. Versus Aura and Lee Sin, that snowball super hard, and my top jungle will never have pressure this game, and eventually Aura and Lee Sin will make it impossible for me to play the game mid-late, so I ditch the wave. I path immediately to counter the gank and end up contributing enough burst damage for Master Yi to kill Lee Sin, and because I'm here, we win the play. And to be clear, if I don't move here, there is no counterplay for my top and jungle. The enemy Lee and Aura are strong enough to one-shot Yi or Nasus if they try to make it back to tower range, and they can just zone them while they deny Nasus 10 minions worth of gold and EXP. So I turned this hard losing play into a winning play, and I even made it back to the next wave while saving the game. game. And later on, Nasus and Yi ended up being the hard carries of this game, all because I turned their doomed scenario into a hard winning one. These sorts of roam angles are exactly what you should be looking for when you roam, turning losing plays into winning ones. The only issue is that you have to be able to tell if your teammates will last long enough for you to save the fight. Otherwise, you'll just be roaming to a graveyard and get nothing of value. There are a few simple factors to figure out if a losing play can be turned into a winning one: numbers, HP bars, and distance. First is numbers. What I mean by this is if you're roaming to a play and it's 2v3 with 2 allies and 3 enemies, then your presence will make it equal. Chances are this won't be a winning play. On the other hand, turning a 3v3 into a 4v3 in your favor is almost guaranteed to be good for you. However, you still have to keep in mind HP bars. If your teammates are already too low and on the verge of death, and the enemies are still healthy, then numbers won't matter because you won't get any help on your roam. So you should avoid roaming if you can't kill anyone, or there's a high risk of them turning on you and killing you instead. And finally, the last factor is distance. If the enemies are hugging safety, such as their towers, or they can retreat easily before you arrive, then you're better off not risking it. On the other hand, if they're super deep into your team's territory, like on a tower dive, or if they're invading your jungle, then it's very good to roam to the play, assuming that numbers and HP bars are playable. And that about covers roaming to losing plays. To summarize, don't roam to losing plays if they will remain losing on your arrival, but you should roam to losing plays if you can convert that losing scenario into a winning one. Fortunately for us, that was the most complicated scenario. The next 2 plays are much simpler. First, let's talk about winning scenarios. If a scenario is winning and it will remain winning even if you go, then you shouldn't go to it. Just get value elsewhere, whether it's minion waves or plates. You should play for yourself because no matter what, your team will be winning out and you don't need to miss any waves for a play that is already secured. However, let's say that for some reason a winning scenario is about to turn into a losing one. Then you should roam if you can turn it back into a winning one. Let's go back to that LeBlanc clip I showed you earlier. For me, I'm turning a losing scenario into a winning one, but for my lane opponent Veigar, he's letting his winning scenario become a losing one for no reason. Keep in mind, this is a challenger game, so my opponent should have the feeling that I'm probably roaming to cancel Lee Sin's play if I'm not showing on the minion wave he just crashed into my tower. So all he has to do is move up the river preemptively and hover, just in case I do make this roam play, and then Lee Sin wouldn't get one shot because Veigar will be there to help him, and Lee Sin, Aurora, and Veigar are happy and back in their winning scenario of denying my Nasus CS. Basically, Veigar had the opportunity to nullify my play, but he didn't. In fact, it's even worse because he literally shoved out the wave while I didn't. This would be a double win for the enemy team because I'll be losing CS and Nasus will also be losing CS while Aura and Veigar both got their waves in. This is the heist of a century, and their early game would be won just by using waves here. So if you notice your team is in a winning scenario, but it's about to turn into a losing one, and you can flip it back to a winning one, then you should roam. And finally, our simplest sort of roam is one where you roam to a neutral scenario. Basically, not much is happening, neither team is fully committed, or maybe the skirmish going on would end up in a 1-for-1 or something like that. For this type of roam scenario, you should only go if it is guaranteed to become winning on your arrival there. For example, the opponents are too far up to escape in time, so you can secure some kills. But if your arrival there would mean that the enemy withdraws, or you arrive and it just becomes even numbers, then you don't need to go there. You should farm instead to build up an individual lead so you can carry in more volatile scenarios later. However, you can't always make perfect roams. Maybe you arrive and your teammates are still dead or the play's over. This scenario is also where you are probably losing out on a ton of waves. If it ends up being the case that your teammates are dead, especially if it's the ADC or top laner, your roam is not finished. Most mids will make the mistake of just recalling or walking back to mid when there is a perfectly fine wave staring them right in the face. Here's the thing, if you were to leave that side lane wave and head back mid, chances are that mid wave is just gonna die to tower or enemy minions and you'll be bleeding value while you're traveling across the map. Instead, you can kill that wave right in front of you and get all the value while your respawning ADC or top laner walks mid for one wave and catches the mid wave that you can't. The value of a wave far outweighs the quest points, especially for mid lane, whose quest completion time barely even matters. However, if that wave is an enemy slow push, basically there's a whole lot more enemy minions compared to yours, and it won't crash before your ally makes it back to lane, then you should probably just base. They'll get really angry that you took their slow stacked wave and probably rage at you or AFK. And another warning, if you're in low elo, your teammates might not understand what the heck just happened. They'll just be thinking, why is my mid laner stealing my wave right now? Instead of realizing they could have just went mid to pick up the same wave for free, and everybody wins. In the case that they are clueless and walking back to their side lane regardless, this is still good for you. You got to eat your wave, but your teammate didn't because they're stupid. That's fine. The only issue that you might see is that your low elo teammate literally just AFKs and rage quits. Well, fortunately in 2026, you get -0 LP if this happens. So regardless, I recommend that you use this technique because it will provide far more value using it it than not, on the off chance your teammates are psychotic. Alright, and up next is the second mistake you're making around waves, and that is not taking good recalls when you can. But what do I mean by good recall? Well, basically a good recall is one where if you were to recall, you would keep your lane pressure. A bad recall is one where you lose all your lane pressure when it was avoidable. So think about it this way. Let's say you're winning lane, you're out farming, you're out trading, and you force your opponent out of lane, and now you've shoved the wave in. If it's pretty late into laning phase, around level 7 or higher, then it might be fine to go for the plate and just stick around in lane, since you one-shot waves and you can constantly create timers where you have shove advantage if you have enough HP and mana. But early on, usually level 6 or lower, your wave clear is much weaker because your abilities are weaker with less skill points. And so many mid laners make the mistake of greeting for plates when instead they should have recalled after shoving so that their lane opponent doesn't get any room to breathe. When your lane opponent gets back to lane, they'll have refresh resources. They'll have full mana and HP and have bought items, while you're stuck in lane with missing mana, HP, and unspent gold. This means temporarily your opponent will be stronger than you, so it'll be harder to get a good recall timer if you let this happen. If you had recalled immediately after shoving, you would have been back in lane with full HP and mana, and probably better items because you had shove advantage. But instead, you lose pressure and you still have to base. This gives your opponent room to breathe and gives them a guaranteed timer where they can try to get a roam off while you're going back to base. You want to avoid this at all costs. A good mid laner will never let their opponent breathe if they have a lead, whereas a mid laner that sucks will give these windows out for free. So instead of greeting for that extra plate or wave, you should instead recall after killing your opponent or sending them back to base. And to be clear, this is mostly after you've won a round of laning and your opponent is no longer there. If they're still laning and you still have pressure, then you should keep laning as well until they ultimately concede and take their first recall without shoving or die. Alright, so let's see how OP waves really are in action. In this game, I was playing Syndra versus a Master LeBlanc. We both took Ignite and Electrocute, so the lane was super volatile. Here's where you might be surprised to find out that despite me being Challenger and my lane opponent being lower ranked than me, I still lost lane and got first blooded. That is because the biggest difference between a Challenger mid and Grandmaster to High Diamond mids is not mechanics, but fundamentals, which is why the stuff I'm teaching you in this guide is so OP. So check it out. LeBlanc solo kills me, and she has a perfect wave right now. All she has to do is press the recall button and she is 100% going to win lane because this is a super snowballing matchup. If LeBlanc gets ahead, there is nothing I can do as the Syndra unless I play like Faker himself, which obviously is not going to happen this game given how I play the first 2 levels. And before I move on, I'll give you a quick crash course on wave states because they're important to know before deciding to recall. There are only 3 types of wave states. The first is the simplest, even or neutral wave state. The number of minions are the same and the wave meets in the middle. The second wave state is a slow push or rebound. In this scenario, the wave is on your side of the lane and you have equal or slightly more ally minions than the enemy does. If your wave state is like this, then you should always avoid recalling because the very nature of a slow push secures you shove advantage since your minions contribute shove by auto attacking, and you can get a good recall while your opponent is stuck farming that wave you just slow pushed on their tower. If you were to recall on a slow push, the enemy minions you're going to farm would just go to the void as your bigger ally minion wave just kills the enemy wave, so avoid this at all costs. The only exception is if you're too low to shove even with a slow push, then you just have to take the L and take a recall because it's better than dying. And finally, the third wave state is one where you have a freeze. Basically, the requirement for this is that the enemy wave is about 4 minions bigger than yours, but the wave is on your side of the lane and it is outside of tower range. So rather than it being a slow push in the enemy's favor like the earlier wave state, it is a freeze in your favor. If your opponent does not break the freeze, then they will lose out on minions because your minions will die to theirs and continue to die to theirs until the freeze is broken. But it's actually really hard to hold a freeze in mid lane because you can't reset minion aggro using brushes like in top or bot, and the lane is really short, so the enemy mid can walk up and break it with their abilities pretty easily. Freezes only matter in the early game. Don't make the mistake of trying to force freezes just because you can. So going back to the game versus LeBlanc, she has a freeze wave state here. I have exactly 4 more ally minions than LeBlanc does, meaning if she just takes a recall now, she will basically have the entire wave to farm when she gets back, while all the enemy minions I was supposed to farm die and go to the void, and my lane is hard lost. I will be down 500 gold and a level. It is over for me here. But LeBlanc makes the biggest mistake here. She doesn't recall, and this non-mechanical mistake cost her the entire game. Because she attempts to fight the current and force a shove against a big wave, she takes way longer to shove. This does 2 things. First, it saves me the entire enemy minion wave I was going to lose out on because my minions would have killed it. Second, it jails herself in lane. This guy is hard stuck in lane now. If she tries to recall without fully shoving, then she will be recalling while her wave is slow pushing out, meaning she ends up losing minions. So she just turned her hard winning scenario into a neutral one at best. So if she were to recall now, she'd still be winning lane because she got first blood and has more EXP and gold than me. She'd be up 300 gold and half a level, whereas in the other scenario, if she had just recalled, she would be up 500 gold and an entire level. It's still salvageable, but she makes the worst decision ever. She decides to commit to shoving the wave in, despite the fact that she's low on HP. And this is exactly what I warned against earlier. If you delay your recall after sending your enemy back to base or killing them, then they'll come back fresh and be able to contest you, which is exactly what I start doing. And because she doesn't have the HP bar to compete with my refresh resources, I end up getting the soul kill back, and my lane is back to even when it should have been completely doomed. And instead of stomping me, LeBlanc ends up being the one stomped, all because she refused to press the B button when the wave was in the ideal state to deny me CS and secure hers. So always make sure to take proactive recalls when you send your opponent back to base or kill them. Do not greed for that plate or next wave, because it'll just do more harm than good in the long run. The only exception to this is if your wave is slow pushing, then you can probably clear the wave in time thanks to your minions helping you. And while we're on the topic of recalls, it's okay to take a bad recall if you've messed up. One of the biggest mistakes I'll see low elo mids make is that they won't take a recall if they've screwed up their lane. In season 16, it is so OP to recall because of how much distance your home guards covers. The only thing worse than losing out on a wave is dying and losing out on a wave, because dying gives even more gold and EXP advantage over to your lane opponent. So if you've ever messed up your lane to the point that you would die if you stayed for another wave and tried to contest, just base. Refreshing your HP and mana and sprinting back with home guards gives you the chance to fight and win your lane back. And you can be sure that your opponent will give you chances. If even a Masters mid laner plays greedy around waves, certainly your opponents will make wave mistakes too. If you found this helpful, just a reminder that my full 6-part mid essentials course is now live over at SkillCapped. So if you want a deeper breakdown into more of the must-know concepts for climbing on mid lane this season, including laning fundamentals, roaming, and mid to late game macro, make sure you check out the link in the description or pinned comment below, as if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped, you get all your money back. Alright guys, that was a bit of a long one. Thanks for sticking through it with me, and I wish you luck as you begin your journey to improving in mid lane. We'll see you in the next one.